So what if the long, silent ages of prehistory weren't some empty prelude, but were actually the elaborate setup for a grand play? Today, we're going to dive into a really fascinating idea from the writer Hugh Nibley, one that completely reframes the story of humanity, specifically the story of what happened before Adam.
You know, it all kicks off with a question that can feel almost impossible to square away. Nibley mentioned his students would ask him this all the time. What do we do with the dinosaurs, with the stone tools, with these immense stretches of time that science has uncovered? How does any of that fit into the story of Adam and Eve?
For centuries, this question has basically forced people into one of two camps, creating what Nibley called a foolish contest. On one side, you have traditional religion, and on the other, modern science. And the way he saw it, in this big quarrel, both sides are kind of missing the real story.
All right, so first up in this contest, the traditional religious thesis. This point of view, it proposes a very clean, very absolute beginning to the whole human story. At the very heart of this view is the doctrine of creatio ex nihilo, which is just Latin for creation out of nothing. For a long, long time, this was the standard model. Before a very specific moment in time, there was, well, literally nothing, just a void. And then, bam, out of that void, God created everything.
And the implication here is pretty profound. It means Adam is the absolute beginning, existing in what Nibley calls a vacuum. He's the first thinking being on the only planet with life in a totally silent, empty universe. There's no backstory because there was nothing there to be a backstory.
Okay, now for the other side of the quarrel, science's antithesis. This perspective, it fills that pre-Adamic void with eons of time and, mountains of evidence. But as Nibley argues, it still comes up empty when you're looking for a meaningful story.
So here you can really see the two poles of the argument. Religion gives us an empty void before Adam. Science, on the other hand, gives us this vast, elaborate stage. It's filled with fossils and ancient tools, but there's no play. There are, as Nibley calls them, happenings, but there's no plot, no rhyme or reason to it all. Nibley's metaphor for this is just perfect. He says that science has meticulously set the stage for human history. I mean, we can see the backdrop, the props, the lighting is all set, but the curtain never actually rises. There's no script, no characters with any kind of motivation. We're all just sitting there staring at an empty stage. So what is the story science tells? Well, people lived, they ate, they used tools, they had families. But Nibley's crucial point here is that this isn't a story at all. It's just a list of attributes. It's like a description of the set, not the drama itself. And look, this isn't just Nibley's opinion. He actually cites prehistorians like A.J. Jelinek, who described the archaeological record as one of unimaginable monotony. I mean, just think about that for a second. Places like Olduvai Gorge show almost no significant innovation for nearly 1 million years. That's tens of thousands of generations with virtually no change. Just the same props on the same stage for 1 million years. But Nibley's critique doesn't even stop there. It's not just that the scientific story lacks a plot. He argues that the story itself is built on constantly shifting ground. The whole timeline of human evolution? It is anything but settled. I mean, just look at how the story has changed. Back in the 1950s, the picture of human evolution seemed pretty simple, very linear. But as more and more evidence came out, that neat little line just shattered. Nibley quotes scientists who now call it a period of uncertainty. It seems like the only thing that's certain is that the story is going to keep changing.
And here's the real kicker. This entire scientific narrative, it's not built on observing some connected, clear process. It's built on interpreting the resemblances between a handful of scattered, often damaged fossils. We've got snapshots, but the story that connects them all, that's pure interpretation, and it is always up for debate.
So, if the religious story is an empty void, and the scientific story is an empty stage, what's the alternative? Where do we go? Well, this is where Nibley offers his synthesis, and he reframes the whole debate using his really powerful metaphor of a play.
It all comes back to this one central problem. See, the issue isn't about choosing between fossils and faith. The real issue is that neither side, on its own, offers a meaningful plot for our existence. We're left with either an empty void or an empty stage.
And this brings us to Nibley's powerful conclusion, which he summed up in this one simple phrase: no Adam, no play. So what does that mean? He's suggesting that Adam's arrival on the scene is like a character finally walking on stage with a script. It's the moment the real story finally begins, the moment purpose is introduced to the whole set. So here's how Nibley's framework brings everything together. 1. Those vast eons of prehistory, they aren't some meaningless void. They're the elaborate, slow construction of the stage. 2. Adam's arrival isn't a creation out of nothing. It's the moment the curtain finally rises. And 3. Only when the play actually begins do all those stage settings, the fossils, the mountains, the long ages, suddenly get their meaning as part of the story.
So Nibley's framework doesn't dismiss prehistory, not at all. It reframes it. Those long, monotonous ages, they weren't the story. They were the slow, deliberate preparation for the real drama. And that leaves us with a final, really fascinating question. If our history is a grand play, what does it tell us about the story, and maybe about its author, that the stage took millions of years to prepare before the curtain ever rose?